director of Cats. Les Miserables. Now, Les Miserables was a film, it came out on Christmas Day 2012, and it got mixed reviews. To this day, critics still are split on whether or not this is a good adaptation of the stage musical or even Victor Hugo's original book. But what do I think about it? Well, it's definitely more of an adaptation of the musical than it is of the book. Almost every single word of this movie is sung. So if hearing people sing all of their dialogue is not for you, well then this movie just simply isn't your movie. But for me, I don't mind. I'm a big sucker for a good musical. Now, this is a long story because they packed a monstrous book into a 3-hour stage play and then compressed it again into this 2.5-hour movie. So let's start at the beginning. Hugh Jackman plays Jean Valjean, and he has a great voice. We all know this. And he does a really strong job at Jean Valjean. He brings the complexity, he brings the haunted nature of this character to light, and I really dug it. Sentenced for 5 years in prison, hauling in ships, that's extended to 19 years because he's tried to escape. That is until one day when he's granted parole and can live out the rest of his days as a free man. Now granted, he's not really a free man because he has a slip of paper that tells everybody that he's a convict, and that makes it really hard for him to find any good work. So with nowhere else to go, a nice bishop takes him in, played by the legendary Colm Wilkinson, the original Jean Valjean on stage. Now at this point, Jean Valjean is still a convict and is really only thinking of himself. So he steals the nice silver from the church, but gets caught. And now here's where the story really gets going, because what happens is the bishop gives him grace. He knows that Jean Valjean ripped him off and tried to sell off the church's silver, but instead of turning him in, he gives him grace. And he says that he gave Jean Valjean the silver and that he's not going to press any charges. So the cops leave, but then he tells him one very important thing. He tells him that he must use the silver that has been given to him to become an honest man. So really this story is about grace and the impact grace can have on life. And we see this theme played out through all the different characters. Now this really messes up Jean Valjean because for the past 19 years he's only known pain and suffering. And by the bishop giving him grace, this is the first kind gesture that he can remember. And what does he do? He turns his life around. In fact, in the next scene he becomes mayor. And I know this is where it doesn't really adapt too well to the screen because in a stage you have scene changes and you have passage of time that's implied. But in here he's singing about how he's going to change his life. Yes, there is 8 years that go by, but he's a mayor in the next scene. It's a little tough to swallow. But the point is there, that he used the silver to really start an entirely new life, separate from what he knew before. And here's where we meet our next big player, Fantine, played by Anne Hathaway. Anne Hathaway kills it in this performance. Her character is probably the most tragic character in any film or stage play. Her story is one of tragedy and misery, and absolutely no grace given to her until the very end. Fantine is employed by Jean Valjean and gets fired because she won't give the foreman the time of day. So she's cast out on the street, forced to sell her hair, her teeth, even her body, in order to care for her daughter Cosette, which she hasn't even seen in years. And this is the one element where I'd say it is done far better than the stage play. Because in this movie, they did the smart choice of moving her big I Dreamed a Dream song, a song about how terrible her life is compared to what she thought it would be. It's her lowest low. So they moved it from when she gets fired to her actual lowest low after she becomes a prostitute. This is incredibly powerful because unlike the play where it's just, I got fired from my job, I'm really sad, she got fired and went through all of this and is now singing I Dreamed a Dream in one take with more emotion and heartbreak than I've seen in a performance. That song alone won her Best Supporting Actress in the 2013 Oscars, and you can tell why. But again, this is where grace comes in, because after Fantine lost all sense of hope in her life, Jean Valjean finds her in trouble with the law and saves her from going to prison. Not only that, but he also promises to take care of Cosette and raise her as his own. And this touches Fantine so deeply that compared to the entire life she's lived before, her husband leaving her having to give up Cosette to an innkeeper and his wife, and all of the incredibly grotesque things that she's had to do for money, this is the one time where someone showed her grace, and she doesn't know how to handle it. So she's very grateful, but then promptly dies. Oh, and I should also mention another character, played by Russell Crowe, who's constantly looking sing for Jean Valjean since he broke his parole, always just one step behind him. Now, Javert is probably the weakest part of this, mainly because of Russell Crowe's performance. Russell Crowe tends to underact and really internalize a lot of things, and he comes off really stoic. He doesn't let a lot of emotion cross his face. And for Javert, that works because he's supposed to be the statue of a man. But the decision to make every line sung like in the musical really hurts Russell Crowe's performance because he's constantly singing his lines and he's not really up to par with the other characters. All of the other characters have amazing singing voices, which is really important if you're doing a musical adaptation of Les Mis, probably the most difficult production to put on, and vocally really difficult. I cannot stress this enough. Les Mis is the most musical that's ever musicaled. There is so much singing, so much drama, so much just musical in this movie. You have to get the music element right. Now, they tried something very ambitious for this movie. They had all the actors sing live as to whether or not musicals should do this. On the one hand, you get a much more authentic performance out of it. But on the other hand, if you have an actor like Russell Crowe who doesn't sing as well, it can really stand out and hurt the movie because you can't go in and record it over and tweak things in post. But I think for this adaptation in particular, it was the right move. And it's for one reason. Now, most musicals are organized with big musical numbers and then the in-between talking. This story doesn't have that delineation. So if you were gonna dub, you would have to dub every line in the entire movie. It would really do a disservice to the incredible talent that you have hired to be in this movie. And while Russell Crowe can sing, and in some scenes he does a decent job, it's really stretched him, and I don't think he was the best choice to play this role. But now, let's talk about the revolution. Because about halfway the story shifts. It kind of stops being about Jean Valjean and starts being about the cause. And it's at this point where Cosette stops being this little kid that Jean Valjean adopted and has now grown into Amanda Seyfried. And this is where the movie kind of falls into your typical Broadway love triangle, because you have Amanda Seyfried's cooped up Cosette, who really hasn't had a friend in her life, aside from Jean Valjean, who one day just happens to see this young boy Marius, played by Eddie Redmayne. Thankfully, he does not give the same performance that he did in Jupiter Ascending, although that would be hilarious.
I create life! And I destroy it.
Maybe I'll talk about that movie someday. But in this movie, he plays Marius, a rich college-age boy who has joined the French Revolution with his friends and wants to overthrow the new government. So she sees him one day and falls hard. They both do. It's kind of like a love at first sight kind of thing. But where's the love triangle? That's only two people. You can't have a two-sided triangle. Well, I forgot to mention, the couple of innkeepers that raised Cosette also had a daughter of their own that they treated far better. And her name is Eponine, played in her adult form by the incredibly attractive Samantha Barks. Now, she has had the biggest crush on Marius for years, it seems, and he's barely given her the time of day. Then she sings a song about the friend zone, which is probably the second most famous song in the musical, On My Own. And she also has a really strong voice. Now, she's not really famous, but she has experience playing Eponine. And I really wish this movie made her career take off, because she does a really good job in this role. She makes a song that's incredibly juvenile, being rejected by a guy for another girl, have so much weight and pain that she really sells it. And really, the last big player is Enjolras, who is the de facto leader of this band of college-age dudes, and he is gung-ho about the revolution. He's played by Aaron Tveit, who you might remember from the Grease Live that was on TV not too long ago, and he is incredibly talented. I'd say more talented than Marius. While Eddie Redmayne can sing, he's got this shaky head vibrato going on, and I don't know who coached him on this. It's not necessary, dude. Meanwhile, Aaron Tveit just belts it with no problem. And really the only element that I wanted to talk about is the idea of grace. Valjean has been an agent of grace and generosity, and this movie gets that across. He gets out into the real world, no grace, until a bishop gives him a fresh start, and he uses that grace to be a better man. Not everybody accepts that. Fantine couldn't really handle it. She accepted the grace, but had been crushed so hard by her life that she couldn't recover. Cosette and Marius, still pretty innocent in their youth, accept the grace and generosity that Valjean has given them and go live out their best version of their life. But tragically, Inspector Javert, who has lived by the letter of the law his whole life, has been hounding Jean Valjean, trying to bring him to justice. There's absolutely no room for grace until he lets him go. There's a scene towards the end, and it is an incredibly powerful scene, where Valjean is cornered by Javert, is carrying Marius on his back. Javert tries to arrest him and take him to justice, but Valjean pleads for not his own life, for Marius's life. And at that point, as an audience member, you don't know what he's gonna do. He has lived his entire life by law. He says he's gonna do something, he's gonna do it. And here he says,
one more step and you die.
Valjean keeps walking, doesn't get shot. Javert showed grace. He knew the boy. In fact, he fought against the boy during the revolution, but he showed him grace. It doesn't sit well with him. And this scene and the following scene is really where Russell Crowe is not a terrible Javert. He can act when he really tries, and he does a pretty good job here. So the next scene, he's contemplating his life, the meaning of grace, about owing Valjean a debt. Why did he allow Valjean to escape? What is this thing inside him that denies the law? And while he doesn't actually say it, he knows that it's grace. And he can't deal with it, so he kills himself. That's the only out that he sees. So as you see, this movie, it's about how one act of grace can change a life. And when one life is changed, it affects everyone else's life. And some people will accept it and be better, and some people will reject it. And it's incredible that this musical that is so bombastic and loud and over-the-top dramatic touches on something incredibly human, and that is grace. And when someone does something that we don't deserve, that we can't ever hope to pay back, what do we do with that? And that's the story of Les Mis. It's an incredibly emotional roller coaster of a movie, and not all of it is done well, but I fully endorse it. It's a good adaptation of a great musical, and its message of grace is incredibly powerful. And it's ironic that a musical with a title that translates to The Miserable Ones has such an optimistic message about grace and the good that it can do. So I hope that more people do watch this and take its message to heart, because if the bishop can show some grace to a stranger that stole from him, maybe the rest of us can show a little grace too. So thanks for watching my talk, and as always, click like and subscribe, and hit that notification bell to be notified every time I upload a video. And comment below, what movie do you want me to review next? I've got a bunch of movies lined up, but I really want to know, what are you interested in seeing? I'm Colby, this was my nerdy talk, and I'll see you in the next video.